When I left for my week-long holiday break, I expected that by the time I came back to this video series that the political climate would slow down at the very least a little bit. I didn't expect that it would all become sane overnight. Of course, that would be unreasonable, but I would wish at least for a holiday miracle, that at the very least the first couple of days of 2022 would be at least relatively more sane than the whole year of 2021. Oh, how wrong I was, because we are just 3 days in to 2022, and it is at the very least on par, if not surpassing, some of the most insane things that happened in 2021, and it's not all bad, let's be clear, and it's not all completely insane as well. I mean, you do have the more normal insanity of places like The Guardian, who are now calling for shortages in response to the inflation, and you also have China being revealed to have spied on Western social media websites, which, though it is not surprising, it is absolutely nice to have confirmation of such. But those aren't really what I'm talking about. We really have to talk about one of the biggest sagas in perhaps COVID-19 history, and the turning point, I would say, of much of the rhetoric surrounding COVID-19, and that is regarding the paragon of flip-flopping himself, Dr. Anthony Fauci, because he has started to do a bit of a heel turn on coronavirus propaganda. It seems that he has decided that pushing COVID hysteria is no longer as useful as it was even just a couple of months ago, and so he has started to admit that hospitals are overcounting COVID hospitalizations of children, saying that because children who come into the hospital for any reason whatsoever get a COVID test, if they then test positive for coronavirus, they get counted as a coronavirus hospitalization, despite the fact that they aren't there for COVID-19 at all and might not even have symptoms in the first place. They might be there for a broken leg, to use his example. This is quite the heel turn, because he has gone from saying that the coronavirus statistics are completely unquestionable to now basically saying the same thing I was just, well, throughout the past year and a half. He has now gone from you cannot distrust any of the statistics to now saying, well, it's with COVID, not of COVID. Now, he limits this to saying it's just about the children and doesn't extend this onto adults or to deaths, but the same logic applies in both cases, especially to deaths, considering that the definition was specifically changed for coronavirus so that they would count deaths with COVID as opposed to of COVID. And this isn't the only example of such. Now, that one technically happened in 2021, but I'm including it anyway. But this next thing did. And we have to start with the CDC, because the CDC has now changed some of their qualifications for quarantining. Specifically, they have changed their needs for quarantining healthy people. Now, you might roll your eyes at that, saying, well, quarantines of healthy people aren't quarantines, and I would completely agree with you. But we have to accept that the CDC, being as they are basically the governmental equivalent of blue check marks. And so we have to be patient with them. We have to accept that they're only going to make baby steps towards sanity, and that they won't be able to make it towards full mental capacity until at least they're as old as Joe Biden, and then the dementia is going to get them, so it's not going to exactly help them there. But in this case, they have made some progress. They have gone from saying that people who are healthy have to quarantine for 10 days to saying they just have to quarantine for 5. And this did not go over well with the deranged lunatics of whom they have made their bedfellows. You see, the CDC, Dr. Fauci, the rest of the governmental medical establishment has been making a lot of fans in the deranged lunatic camp. They have made a lot of propaganda trying to convince these people that COVID-19, despite its existence as a basically cold-like virus at this point, especially with Omicron, that it is the death of all time. It is the new plague. It has the death rate of Ebola. And so when these measures were said, it didn't go over well with these deranged lunatics, and many of them felt betrayed, as though the government and Fauci were now betraying the faith. They weren't trusting the science anymore. And now they needed to be chastised and burned at the stake, presumably, for their crimes and heresy. Then the CDC, of course, capitulated, saying that, okay, the science has inverted again. We need to go back to some of these, back on some of these things, saying, particularly with Fauci, that, okay, we need to have a negative coronavirus test before we can let you leave. Which already is a problem, considering that coronavirus tests are spotty at best, even according to Dr. Fauci himself. Now, he says, oh, it's because of false negatives. I say it's because of false positives. Basically, both, as it turns out. The things are just not accurate at all. And so, yeah, that doesn't exactly go over well with anyone with sanity, but to placate the masses of deranged lunatics who now seem to control a substantial portion of society, it's good enough. And along with this new inversion of science, they need to go even harder on the social media censorship. And social medias have been censoring on this particular issue even more blatantly, somehow, since the year has begun, including Twitter, who has gone on another banning spree of COVID misinformation mongers, essentially people who tell the truth. And one of the people who has now fallen directly into their crosshairs is Marjorie Taylor Greene, an elected representative, who now cannot speak to her constituents on the Twatters, which, as though that would be helpful, because Twitter has now banned her, permanently suspended her, and so now she has to flee over to Getter, which, follow me there, KelKidman is my @ if you want to check all that out. Links down in the description. I'll show it later again. And on top of that, on more Getter news, Joe Rogan has actually been censored. He has had some YouTube videos taken down, which is now a familiar sensation to me because I went through the same experience as well, because some of my videos got taken down while I was gone as well. These videos were on election issues, one of which I expected to go down at some point, but the other one kind of baffled me, because though YouTube disallows you from talking about the election which shall not be named, I didn't do that in one of the videos that was taken down off of YouTube. Now, all of those videos are up on alternate platforms, and I suggest you go check it out, and coincidentally, so is Joe Rogan. He is now on Getter, another reason to go check out that site. And that's all a good thing. And I think a lot of this displays something quite poignant about the propaganda, because the propaganda that has surrounded coronavirus has been very dense. And as well, it's been very obvious, especially over just the past couple of weeks. There have been so many obvious heel turns that have gone from, this is perfect and you should never question it at all, to, wait, no, this is actually terrible. Over just the past couple of weeks, some of which I've already talked about, the mask one, for instance, that has already gone on and has continued unabated, by the way, that particular rollback, along with the hospitalization numbers and the unquestioning nature of those, there has been a lot of those sorts of things. And it is worth it to mention that the propaganda with regard to the coronavirus does not exist to convince many people who are now hearing it that coronavirus is the Great Plague. And that is not the point, because anyone who would have been convinced about that particular premise has already believed that for 2 years at this point. And many of those people who did believe that at one point have moved on from believing that particular thing. No, it's not to convince anyone of the truthfulness of the propaganda. It's to convince you that you stand alone. It's to convince you that there's nothing you can do, but that isn't true. These past few weeks have been pretty good evidence of that, because these insanities, these pushbacks, these complete heel turns show that eventually the pressures of reality will force the propagandists to tell the truth for once. And that, I think, is one of the biggest white pills you can have going into this new year. And it's where I'm going to leave you guys off. If you enjoyed this video, do subscribe down below and check me out on other platforms, which I have already mentioned. I have all of those links down in the description, and they lead you to such wondrous places as BitChute, Brighteon, Odyssey, Rumble, all of those places. And on top of that, you have my Minds, Gab, and the aforementioned Getter links down there as well. All of my ads on those places are KelKidman. Check out all of those websites and places to see more of me. I'm KelKidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.